Stop scrolling because this tiny 4-cent US stamp could be far more interesting than it looks. At first glance, many people would see an old green stamp and think it is just another forgotten piece of paper. But collectors know that the real story can be hidden in the details. Featuring the famous portrait of Andrew Jackson, this classic United States stamp has a history that goes back to the 19th century, and exceptional examples of the 4-cent Jackson issue have reached thousands of dollars in the collector market. So before you throw away an old stamp like this, take a closer look, because you may be looking at a piece of American postal history. Welcome back to Stamps US, the channel where we explore rare, historic, and fascinating American stamps. Today, we are looking closely at this beautiful 4-cent Andrew Jackson stamp. The design is simple, elegant, and instantly recognizable. Andrew Jackson appears in profile at the center, surrounded by the classic United States postage design, with the denomination clearly marked as 4 cents. But what makes this stamp so interesting is not just the portrait or the green color. The real question is this: what exact version is it and what condition is it in? This stamp is associated with the classic 4-cent Andrew Jackson issues of the 1880s. 1. Particularly important 1883 blue-green issue is known as Scott 211. And this is where the value story becomes much more exciting. A normal used stamp should never automatically be called a fortune. However, collectors pay close attention to stamps with strong color, fresh original gum, excellent centering, and outstanding overall condition. A superb professionally graded example of the 4-cent Jackson issue has sold for $3,050, and that is exactly why serious collectors never judge an old stamp by its face value alone. Think about that for a moment. The stamp says 4 cents, but in the right condition, the collector market can value an exceptional example at thousands of dollars. This is one of the biggest lessons in stamp collecting. The number printed on the stamp is not the same thing as its collector value. A 4-cent stamp is not automatically worth 4 cents. The true value depends on rarity, condition, demand, and the exact catalog identification. Now look closely at the condition of a stamp like this. The first thing collectors examine is the centering. Are the margins balanced around the design, or is the stamp noticeably shifted to one side? Next comes the color. A deep, rich, fresh color can make a major difference. Then collectors examine the paper and the gum. If the stamp is unused and still has its original gum, that can be extremely important. But there is one warning every collector needs to remember. Do not try to clean or repair an old stamp yourself. Even a small mistake can destroy important collector value. And here is where the story gets really interesting. Some collectors spend years searching through old albums, inherited collections, and forgotten envelopes looking for stamps in exceptional condition. Why? Because ordinary examples of a stamp can be common, while a perfectly centered, fresh, high-grade example can be dramatically more desirable. In the world of philately, the difference between an average stamp and a true gem can be enormous. This Andrew Jackson stamp also has an important historical connection. Andrew Jackson was the 7th President of the United States, and his image appeared on numerous U.S. stamps over the years. The 4-cent denomination was used for postal needs of its era, and the design became part of the classic banknote period of American stamp production. When you hold a stamp like this, you are not just holding an old collectible. You are holding a tiny piece of the history of American communication. Now let's talk about the biggest mistake people make when they discover an old stamp. They search online, see a huge price, and immediately assume their stamp is worth the same amount. But collectors know that asking prices are not the same as confirmed auction prices. The exact stamp must be identified and the condition must be carefully evaluated. A damaged, heavily canceled, or poorly centered example may be worth far less than a pristine, professionally certified stamp. So if you believe you have a rare stamp, always compare the exact issue and condition before making a value claim. But imagine finding this stamp in an old family album. Maybe it was stored away for decades. Maybe someone bought it many years ago and completely forgot about it. You open the album, see an old green Andrew Jackson stamp, and think, it is probably just a 4-cent stamp. That is exactly how valuable details can be overlooked. The difference could be hidden in the color, gum, centering, or the exact issue number. So could this stamp make you rich? The honest answer is that not every example will be worth thousands. But the confirmed collector market shows why exceptional examples deserve serious attention. A superb example of the 1883 4-cent Jackson issue reached $3,150, proving that condition and quality can make an incredible difference. So check your old stamp albums today. Look for classic U.S. stamps featuring famous American figures. Do not focus only on the denomination. Instead, examine the details. Is the stamp unused? Does it have original gum? Is the color strong? Is the design well-centered? Are the perforations complete? And most importantly, can you identify the exact stamp? This 4-cent Andrew Jackson stamp is a perfect reminder that sometimes the biggest surprises come in the smallest packages. A stamp that looks ordinary to one person could be a fascinating collectible to another. And if you love discovering hidden treasures in old U.S. collections, make sure you subscribe to Stamps U.S. for more rare stamp stories, collector values, and incredible American postal history. Because you never know, your next old stamp might be worth much more than the number printed on it. Next up, we are taking a close look at this classic 2-cent George Washington stamp. The design features Washington in profile, surrounded by the words United States postage, with the denomination 2 cents printed at the bottom. The green color gives this stamp a truly classic 19th century appearance. But the biggest question is not simply, is this stamp old? The real question is, which exact variety is it and what condition is it in? This stamp is associated with the 1887 2-cent green Washington issue, Scott 213. The American Philatelic Society's historical material identifies the 1887 2-cent green Washington issue as a distinct classic U.S. stamp issue, while modern stamp identification resources emphasize that small differences in design, perforations, printing, and other characteristics can separate similar-looking Washington stamps. And now we get to the part that makes collectors pay attention. A normal example of this stamp is not automatically worth thousands of dollars. But the market history becomes much more exciting when we look at exceptional examples. Auction records show Scott 213 examples selling for hundreds and even thousands of dollars in premium condition or rare formats. One rare plate block sold for $3,500, while another exceptional plate block sold for $3,750. An especially rare used pair has also been recorded at $4,000. Now think about that for a moment. The stamp itself says 2 cents, but a superb or rare example can enter a completely different collector market. This is exactly why serious stamp collectors never judge a classic U.S. stamp only by its printed denomination. The number on the stamp tells you what it was originally used for. It does not automatically tell you what the stamp may be worth today. The first thing collectors examine is the condition. Look at the perforations around the edges. Are they complete? Are any damaged or missing? Next, collectors examine the color. Is the green color fresh and strong, or has the stamp faded over time? Then comes the centering. Is the design balanced inside the perforations? A well-centered stamp can be much more desirable than a badly shifted example. And here is where many people make a huge mistake. They see a stamp online selling for thousands of dollars and assume that every similar-looking stamp is worth the same amount. But that is simply not how the stamp market works. The exact issue, condition, gum, centering, and any special characteristics must all be considered. The American Philatelic Society notes that Washington Franklin identification can involve different designs, perforations, printing methods, and watermarks, which shows just how important proper identification can be. This is why a stamp that looks almost identical to another stamp can have a completely different value. To a casual observer, they may both look like old green Washington stamps. But to a specialist, the differences can be extremely important. A perforation gauge, careful examination, and a reliable catalog can help identify the exact stamp. Now imagine finding this stamp inside an old family album. Maybe it has been sitting there for decades. Maybe the album was inherited from a relative, stored in an attic, or forgotten in a drawer. You open the album and see a green Washington stamp with a tiny 2-cent denomination. Most people might think, it is just an old stamp. But collectors know that old classic issues deserve a much closer look. And remember this important warning. Never clean an old stamp and never try to repair it yourself. Do not wash it, scrape it, or glue torn areas. Even a small amateur repair can seriously affect collector value. If you think you have a rare or exceptionally well-preserved example, protect it and have it properly identified. So, could this exact stamp be worth thousands? The honest answer depends on the exact identification and condition. The image alone is not enough to prove a specific high value. But the 1887 2-cent green Washington issue has documented high-value examples in the collector market, including rare formats and exceptional specimens reaching thousands of dollars. That is what makes this stamp so fascinating. It is a perfect example of how a small piece of paper can hide a much bigger story. The stamp represents George Washington, one of the most important figures in American history, and it also connects collectors to the early development of American stamp production and postal history. So check your old stamp albums today. Look for classic green Washington stamps. Examine the perforations, the centering, the color, and the gum. And most importantly, do not assume that a 2-cent stamp is only worth 2 cents. Next up, we are looking at this beautiful 3-cent George Washington stamp. The design immediately stands out with its rich purple color, detailed engraved portrait, and classic Washington profile. At the bottom, the denomination 3 cents is clearly displayed. But the most important question is not simply, how old is this stamp? The real question is, which exact variety are you looking at? This is where the story becomes extremely interesting. Similar-looking 3-cent Washington stamps can belong to different issues and varieties. Collectors carefully examine the design, perforations, paper, color, cancellations, and other characteristics before assigning an exact catalog number. The 1861 3-cent Washington issue, for example, has documented rare varieties and exceptional examples that have sold for hundreds or even thousands of dollars. One extremely rare example printed on both sides is documented as having only a very small number of known copies, while superb and unusual examples have also achieved strong auction results. Now think about that for a moment. The stamp says 3 cents, but an exceptional or rare variety can be worth thousands of dollars. This is exactly why serious collectors never judge an old stamp by the denomination printed on it. 3 cents is what the stamp was originally used for. The collector market value can be completely different. The first thing collectors look at is the condition. Examine the perforations around the edges. Are they complete and undamaged? Then look at the centering. Is the Washington portrait positioned evenly inside the perforations? A beautifully centered stamp can be far more desirable than a badly shifted example. Collectors also pay close attention to the color. A strong, fresh purple or rose shade can make a stamp much more attractive to the market. And then there are the hidden varieties. This is the part that makes stamp collecting so exciting. 2 stamps can look almost identical to a beginner, but a specialist may notice a difference in the printing, paper, or a rare production characteristic. In fact, one documented 3-cent Washington variety was printed on both sides, and only a very limited number of sound examples are known. That is the kind of discovery that can completely change the story of an old stamp. But here is an important warning. Do not look at an online listing and assume your stamp is automatically worth the same price. Many people list ordinary stamps for huge amounts of money online. A real collector value must be based on the exact stamp, its condition, and preferably confirmed sales or reliable catalog information. This is why identification is so important. Now imagine finding this stamp inside an old family album. Maybe it has been stored for more than a century. Maybe someone inherited it and never paid attention to it. You open the album and see an old purple Washington stamp. Most people might think it is simply an old 3-cent stamp. But collectors know that the smallest details can sometimes be the most important clues. And please remember, never clean an old stamp. Do not wash it, scrape it, glue it, or try to repair damaged edges. Even a small amateur repair can destroy important collector value. If you think you have a rare example, protect it carefully and have it properly identified. So, could a 3-cent Washington stamp be worth thousands? The honest answer is, some exceptional examples and rare varieties have reached that level, but the exact value of the stamp in your hand depends completely on identification and condition. Documented auction records for rare and superb examples show just how dramatically the value can rise when a stamp has an unusual variety or exceptional quality. That is what makes this stamp so fascinating. It is a tiny piece of paper, but it connects us to the early history of American postage, the classic era of engraved stamp production, and the world of serious philately. So check your old stamp albums today. Look for classic Washington stamps, especially old 3-cent issues. Examine the color, the centering, the perforations, and the printing details. And most importantly, never assume that a 3-cent stamp is only worth 3 cents.
Next up, we are looking at this classic 2-cent George Washington stamp. The design features Washington in profile, surrounded by the words United States Postage, with the denomination 2 cents clearly printed at the bottom. Its rich red-brown color and detailed engraved design immediately show us that this is a classic U.S. stamp from the historic banknote era. This stamp is associated with the 1883 2-cent Washington issue, Scott 210. The issue was printed by the American Bank Note Company, and the stamp was used during an important period in American postal history. The 2-cent denomination became especially important after the first-class domestic letter rate was reduced to 2 cents. Millions of these stamps were produced, but that does not mean every example is worthless. And now we get to the part that makes collectors pay attention. A normal example of this stamp is not automatically worth thousands of dollars. But exceptional examples can enter a completely different market. Auction records show a remarkable Scott 210 example graded gem 100 with a fancy Wheel of Fortune cancellation selling for $4,500. That stamp was recorded as the highest grade example at the time and the only example to achieve that grade. Think about that for a moment. The stamp says 2 cents. But a special example has sold for thousands of dollars. This is exactly why collectors never judge an old stamp only by its face value. The number printed on the stamp tells us what it was originally used for. It does not automatically tell us what it may be worth today. The first thing collectors examine is the condition. Look closely at the perforations around the edges. Are they complete and undamaged? Next, collectors examine the centering. Is the design positioned evenly inside the perforations? Then comes the color. A deep, rich red-brown color can make a stamp much more attractive to collectors. And if the stamp has original gum and exceptional freshness, the value can increase significantly. But there is another important detail, the cancellation. Most people see a cancellation as nothing more than a black mark across the stamp. But collectors know that certain fancy cancellations can make a stamp extremely interesting. In the extraordinary $4,500 example, the cancellation itself was a major part of the stamp's appeal. This is a perfect example of how a detail that many people ignore can become one of the most important features in the entire stamp. And here is where beginners need to be very careful. If you search online and see a 2-cent Washington stamp listed for thousands of dollars, do not immediately assume your stamp is worth the same amount. Online asking prices are not the same as confirmed auction results. The exact issue, condition, centering, gum, and cancellation all matter. A common example can be worth very little, while an exceptional or unique example can attract serious collector interest. Now imagine finding this stamp in an old family album. Maybe it has been stored away for decades. Maybe it was passed down from a relative who collected stamps many years ago. You open the album and see an old 2-cent Washington stamp. Most people might say, it's only 2 cents. But that is exactly how valuable details can be missed. So, if you have an old stamp like this, do not clean it. Do not scrape it. Do not try to repair the edges. Even a small amateur repair can damage the stamp and reduce its collector value. Keep it in a safe, protective environment and have it properly identified if you believe it may be special. The honest truth is that not every 1883 2-cent Washington stamp is worth $4,500. But documented auction results prove that exceptional examples of this issue can reach thousands of dollars. A rare cancellation, superb grade, strong color, and incredible centering can completely transform the story of a stamp. This is what makes stamp collecting so exciting. You do not need a giant treasure chest to make an incredible discovery. Sometimes, the treasure is a tiny piece of paper sitting quietly inside an old album. And sometimes, the most important clue is hidden in the smallest detail. So check your old U.S. stamp collection today. Look carefully at your classic Washington stamps. Examine the color, centering, perforations, gum, and especially the cancellation. And remember, a 2-cent stamp is not always just a 2-cent stamp. If you enjoyed this fascinating stamp discovery, Make sure to like this video and subscribe to Stamps US for more rare American stamps, hidden collector values, and incredible postal history. Because your next old stamp could be worth far more than you ever imagined.